Patience. Okay, we'll give you 30 seconds to finish it. All right, everybody's ready. Well, it's so good to see all of you. Welcome to the first MCCC meeting of 2024. Wow, it's so good to be back. Let's give ourselves a clap for some reason. God. We're back. Yes. So I'm really pleased to share that legislation passed this year, adding some new members, the comptroller, chair of the Public Service Commission, and secretary of emergency management to the Climate Commission. Welcome to you all. Are you all here today?
Don't have any yet today.
No one's here.
We have
Okay.
some members of their teams tuning in.
Okay. That's good. So why don't who's here representing? Why don't you say hello to us?
First, perhaps in the room, we have any representatives, our new members?
Hi, I'm Kim Pezza. I'm representing the comptroller today. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And online, I see Ben Baker. Ben?
Hi, Ben, with the Maryland Public Service Commission. I'll be representing the commission today.
Excellent.
Excellent. Do we have anyone from Department of Emergency Management?
Yes, you have Mike Hinson from MDEM. Thanks for having us.
Great. Welcome, Mike.
Welcome. All right, I'm going to pass it over to you, Chris, for now, so that you can handle roll call and some housekeeping notes for us.
Great. Thank you. So we will do public comment at the end of the meeting. So if there are any members of the public who are online who would like to sign up for public comment, please put your name in the chat box. We'll add you to the list. And for those in the room, we're passing around a sign-up sheet. So if there are any members of the public in the room who would like to offer comment, please add your names to that sheet. We'll do that at the end of the meeting. For now, we'll open with roll call. So for those in the room, we'll go around the room, and then online, for the sake of time, I'll go through and sort of read the commissioners who I can see on the Google Meet. So perhaps why don't we start down at the end with Darren?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. I'm Darren Lovas. I'm the Chief of Environment and Sustainable Transportation at MDOT, and I am serving in as proxy for Paul Wiedefeld, the Secretary of Transportation.
Robert Gilden with University of Maryland School of Nursing.
Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, representing philanthropy.
Dan Neese from Throw Environmental.
Matt Fleming, I'm Director of Resilience Authority for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County.
Stacy Schaefer, I'm the Executive Director of the Charles County Resilience Authority.
Hi folks, David Smedik, Environmental NGO Representative. I'm with RMI.
Good morning, I'm Kim Coble with Maryland League of Conservation Voters.
I believe you know who I am, Secretary Serena McElwain for Environment.
Great. And Chris Hoagland, providing staff support for the commission.
Michael Powell, I'm one of the two business representatives on the commission.
Paul Pinsky, I head up MEA. Bill Dennison, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science.
Steve Chaudhry, Secretary, Maryland Department of General Services.
Russ Dickerson, Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science, University of Maryland, College Park.
Rebecca Flores, Secretary, Maryland Department of Planning.
Beth Harbor, I'm another philanthropic representative with the Able Foundation.
Dana Stein, Delegate.
And we're joined by Mark Stewart, also staff support for the commission. So I will now read off commissioners I can see on the webinar. I see our co-chair, Ann Lindner. Welcome, Ann. I see our People's Council, David Lapp. I see Eric Fisher, Critical Area Commission Chair. Welcome, Eric.
Good morning, everyone.
I see Jesse Iliff. Welcome, Jesse. One of our nonprofit representatives.
Thank you. Good morning.
I see Administrator Belton. Administrator Belton.
Good morning, everyone.
Let's see. Did I miss any commissioners online? Going through. Okay, thank you all. We've got a good group today. So I'll hand it back off to the secretary for opening remarks. But then remember, members of the public, we will get to you at the end of the agenda.
Okay, thank you so much. So a lot has transpired since the commission met last. a few months ago, back in December, we released this agency, Maryland's Department of the Environment, the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan. Hopefully each of you read it. It was literally only 100+ pages. So it was a great read. Hopefully, I think most of you read it. But it does show how we as a state can achieve our near and long-term greenhouse gas reduction goals. Many of the policies that were called out in that plan are really based on the Climate Commission's recommendations. So when you think about the EV incentives, we had heating equipment standards, clean heat standards, clean power standards. These are just some of the policies that the Climate Commission recommended in the past years. And please know that this administration has and is committed to implementing those. The legislative session resulted in the passage of many bills that advance climate policy in the state, as we all know. I want to thank you, Delegate Stein, for all that you did, and Senator Feldman as well.
I don't believe we have Chair Feldman yet.
Just want to thank you for all of your efforts, everything that you did, and your colleagues that you put into passing some major climate legislation this year. I think we should all just give a round of applause for that effort. I think we all know it was quite a year, quite a session, 90 days. This is was my second time enjoying the 90 days. It's quite lovely. When I first walked in the door as secretary, you know how when you're just thrown into something, I thought, wow, this is a lot. And I didn't know a whole lot about the agency and what we were doing as a commission, just thrown into it. So then this year, it was different. I was pretty much mentally ready for it. All year we've been talking and preparing until it happened in January. And I thought, oh, wow, it's the same. This is a lot. So I learned a lot the second year, and I'm looking forward to, I'm going to thank you in advance, Commissioner members, Kim Coble and Mike Powell, because you're going to walk us through some of the ups and downs that we experienced this year. I want to hear your perspective. We're going to hear that later on. But again, I'm glad it's over, but it was a lot. It was a lot of work, a lot of everything. So before we do that, before I turn it over to you, Kim and Mike, we do want to learn a little more about how counties in Maryland are becoming resilient to the impacts of climate change. That's important. And so, who I don't see, we're going to turn it over to Secretary Kurtz.
Secretary Kurtz has been delayed.
Okay.
But we have some guests here.
Okay.
So perhaps we'll leave to you. And I see Administrator Belton has come off mute as well as one of the architects at today's session. So I guess I'll defer to you all who would like to step into the Secretary's shoes and introduce things.
Well, let's start with you. I'll kick it off and then turn it over to people much smarter than I. How's that?
Great.
All right. Well, I really appreciate seeing everybody at the commission today virtually in my case. But it's a great new year with great accomplishments and great things to be accomplished ahead. Specifically with our discussions at the end of last year, as we were putting the final touches on the recommendations in the annual report, we had a lot of talk about how do we pay for the initiatives of climate change and the things that the state and local governments need to do in Maryland to continue to lead the nation in our efforts and really be an example for others to follow. And with that in mind, I'd requested that we put this topic on the agenda just to kind of give an update to the commission members and educate the new members perhaps on resilience authorities. In 2020, the Maryland legislature passed Senate Bill 457, which was enabling legislation for local governments to create organizations, government instrumentalities really, that would work side by side with the governments to basically do anything that needs to be done to implement projects that were climate change resilience related. And to date, there have been 2 such organizations created, one in Charles County, and then one with the combination of the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. There are others that are at various stages of evaluating whether or not these entities might be helpful or appropriate to the specific local situation. And I wanted to emphasize that term local situation because it's a point that needs to be stressed because there's a lot of flexibility in the law that allows the local jurisdiction to create a resilience authority that fits the culture and dynamics of that specific locality. And you're going to hear about how 2 different resilience authorities are doing just that for the different jurisdictions that they represent. And on the panel today, we've got Dan Neese, who is a colleague of mine actually at Throw Environmental. And you'll know Dan from his many years working with the Maryland Center for Environmental Finance. And Stacy Schaefer is with us, who's the executive director of the Charles County Resilience Authority, and Matt Fleming, who is the executive director of the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. So as we predetermined, Dan will kick the panel off, and every member will talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. So if I could turn it over to Dan, please.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. My first time at a commission meeting, and I hopefully have a better experience than you did in your first general conference. So my colleagues at Throw asked me to do this mostly because they were traveling. So I was the one that was asked to do it. And they said I have a single job, which is to make Matt and Stacy look good. And I am overqualified for that job. So that's what I'm going to spend my 5 or 10 minutes talking about. So the idea of the Resilience Authority kind of generated about 7 or 8 years ago. And as Mark said, when Senate Bill 457 was passed, it was pretty open as to what these authorities could do. I will say that it passed unanimously, and that was because there was no fiscal impact. There's no money attached at the state level, and so it breezed right through. Well, it didn't breeze. We had a particular senator who wanted to joust his way through it. But anyway, after that happened, we were in good shape. But what that meant was there were a lot of questions that still need to be answered about what these institutions could do. And so, as you can see from the slide, the idea was basically 4 things could be done, and these institutions could facilitate 4 different functions. The first is to manage an increasingly complex suite of projects, programs, and infrastructure actions that were going to be necessary to mitigate climate change. And so, again, about 7 or 8 years ago, it became very clear that a lot of communities in Maryland, especially those that were coastal and were being impacted by water, were going to have infrastructure issues that were beyond their capacity and how they were set up at that time. And so we knew that from an infrastructure investment point of view, things were going to get much more complex, and having a place where that complexity could be managed and handled would be very effective and very important. The second was to manage diverse revenue streams and sustainable funding mechanisms. I will say that the first thing people ask about when the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County first started, and I was helping get it up and running, literally the day after the legislators in both Anne Arundel County and Annapolis passed the bill, I was getting phone calls from people asking for investment, saying, my yard is flooding, or we want to do this, we want to do that. And I was like, I'm not sure you read the bill that created this. But it was clear right up front that everybody was looking to these authorities for revenue. But in a minute, we'll talk about where those revenues may come from. But most importantly, it gave a place where revenues could be managed, where in some cases they could be advocated for and say that this is an issue that needs support. And that was a very important part of it. From there, once we got into place, we felt it was important to have an institution that could focus investments on what makes the most sense, what is most fiscally efficient, what is the most environmentally efficient, and most importantly, what leads to the long-term economic and cultural resilience of the communities that are putting these programs in place. And so having a focused area, and there's good examples of this all across government. Stormwater utilities are a good example of that when they're run well and when they're run appropriately, which is not always the case. But when it's done that way, then you have a place where the most efficient and effective investments can happen. And then finally, and perhaps Most importantly, as it relates to Senate Bill 457, these institutions have the capacity to finance. In other words, leverage the revenues that they bring in. The bill was very clear. This is not meant to be full faith and credit investment on the part of the communities that create the authority. So if leveraging or financing, debt financing is important, we're talking about revenue-based financing. But again, they are meant to be financing authorities that have the capacity to borrow and invest in capital projects. So in a minute, we're going to hear from Matt and Stacy, and I just want to, so there, as Mark said, there are two authorities that exist right now in the state. This is the only state that has enabling legislation specifically for this type of institution. There are other states that have things that are similar, but not to this effect. And I want to just point out that what you're going to hear from are two examples of what we had in mind when we were developing this idea. When you have a place that provides very strong, dedicated, smart leadership with capacity and resources and an authority, and I use the small a, the authority to do what needs to be done in partnership with the communities, this idea can work. It is not a panacea. It works in some places better than others. It does not take away the difficult questions of like, where is the money going to come from? Who is going to pay? How much are they going to pay? Things like equity, those types of things. But it gives us a better way of having those conversations. And I think what you're about to hear is how successful this can be in a very short period of time. So that's it. That's the kind of the quick background. I think Matt is going to talk about the, I'm sorry?
Stacy.
Oh, Stacy's next. Sorry, Stacy's going to talk about the Charles County Authority, and then Matt will talk about the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. If we could just, yep, there we go. So the Resilience Authority of Charles County, the architect is very much Administrator Mark Belton, thank you. And Throw Environmental. So compared to everyone else here associated with the Resilience Authorities, I'm a relative newbie. I started in January of 2023, so just last year. We had our retreat, we did a retreat with our board members to develop our mission and vision. So we are, what Dan was just mentioning, and Mark, we're as unique as the county we serve. Diversity and equity is huge in our in the county, and therefore for our Resilience Authority. In 2022, the Washington Post came out with statistics that Charles County surpassed Prince George's County as the wealthiest Black majority county in the nation. More than at least 80% of the kids in the public school identify as non-white. Charles County has incredible rural areas. It has incredible ecologically significant areas. It also has urban and way too much concrete, not enough green space, Waldorf urban areas. So we look at everything through an equity lens. Historically, marginalized groups, people of color, low income, are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, given the history of disinvestment. So our mission is to, and I should have had this in front of me, by the way, it's very hard for me to read it. Our mission is to assist communities in adapting and becoming more resilient to the effects of climate change. And our vision is to set a national example of climate resilience grounded in environmental justice for everyone. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So right now, you know, pretty much starting in May, and I know Administrator, oh, thank you. Oh, that's much easier. Thank you so much. The Resilience Authority very much got started on the, what Mark calls the BHAG, the Residential Stormwater Drainage Improvement Program. That's all across Charles County, and I'll talk about that for a moment. That's over 100 neighborhoods who have failing stormwater drainage, which is hundreds of properties. But beyond that, as a 50C3 one-profit 501c3 nonprofit. We have been working on a number of projects throughout the county, and you can see them with the purple diamonds. So we have a project portfolio of assessments, studies, and implementation projects, all of them based in equitable resilience. We are taking advantage of the current government grant opportunities. This past year was a lot of grant writing. We're also, though, investigating diverse financing models, which is very much part of what these resilience authorities were created to do. And we're building community partnerships. Next slide.
Push it up. Just push it up. Like
Push it up. Oh,
this.
okay. I'm showing my age. We leverage partnerships and we work with community challenge. We work with community champions. So one of our partners is University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. We are working with them. They're developing a Charles County Climate Adaptation Report Card. Right now, we're having stakeholder meetings with them, reaching out to communities. And from that, it's very exciting. We're going to establish a Charles County Community Air Quality Program, along with other initiatives with our resilience.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad I am not.
Trying to get to see it of these two.
In terms of financing, a member of the board of directors is the chair of the Montgomery County Green Bank. So we are partnered with the Montgomery County Green Bank to build on the clean energy successes of the Green Bank model and adapting it to attract private capital to nature-based that is based in climate resilience to benefit communities, the economy, and the environment. And as I mentioned, we work with community champions. As a nonprofit, we're a government instrumentality, but we're not part of the government. So we're able to partner with faith-based organizations, New Hope Community Outreach Services in Waldorf we're working with to create a community climate hub, and Nanjamoy Environmental Creek Environmental Education Center are two examples. Slide. There we go. We identify challenges and fund solutions. And as I walk through these, I'm going to explain how we approach each of these challenges. So climate challenge, increased precipitation, storm severity, and storm frequency, leading to flooding. If we look at this through an equity lens, this is what I mentioned in Waldorf. There's an uneven and inequitable distribution of land covers in our urban landscape. Too much concrete, too little green space. And this is in the Waldorf corridor. If you're looking at it, the picture of the concreted parking lot, just a completely concreted facility. And this is actually a county recreation center. So the opportunity is we partnered with Charles County Parks and Rec and the local Waldorf communities to transform an urban concreted space into green space pocket parks that are professionally engineered to absorb stormwater. I'm saying this as if it's already been done. There was grant writing for this this fall, and we were awarded through CBT's Watershed Assistance Grant Program to get started designing and permitting this. So again, as you can see, that's unused parking space, unused concrete. It floods when it rains. It's an urban heat island. There's no place for the kids to go outside. And we're going to tear up the unused concrete and transform that into green space and natural play areas, which will absorb stormwater as well. Okay, and the next slide is where I started, that Administrator Mark Belton began, and this is the residential stormwater drainage improvement program. A great $19 million of funds, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong on that exact number, were dedicated to this effort. The Resilience Authority, actually before I got there, the board working with the county and Mark hired an independent contractor to do an overall view of where is all this stormwater failure happening. There are sinkholes in people's yards, there's flooding. And so after the prioritization was done, and one of the factors was equity again, The county has started spending that money out of the engineering group in their planning and growth management. And I'm working right alongside with them in tandem to look for projects that are environmental justice areas and that have nature-based solutions. So this year we were also awarded a grant through the CVT Watershed Assistance Program to get working on one of those neighborhoods. And again, we're working in tandem with the county. Okay, and this one I'm very excited about because the official announcement was yesterday on Earth Day. The Pope's Creek Waterfront Park, Living Shoreline. The climate challenge here is sea level rise, erosion and flooding, storm surges. And when we look at this through an equity lens, there is a nationwide nature gap in access to nature for people of color, low income people, immigrants, and young families. So what we're trying to improve here is access to nature and its health and its resilience benefits. So the opportunity, again, presented itself was to work with the County Department of Parks and Recs to close this nature gap in Charles County. This will be Charles County's first ever county public beach access. So a large portion of this property that the county bought a few years ago was a tiki bar restaurant where lots of I can only compare it to like Dukes of Hazzard on boats type of type of spot. So it lots of fun. I hear lots of also calls from Natural Resource Police to save people that were walking out. But the county bought this property and is transforming it into a nature-based park. It is subject to sea level rise, as you can see in the middle slide. So I teamed up with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for the Coastal Zone Management, Habitat Protection and Restoration Bipartisan Infrastructure Law competition, and we were recommended awarding for that. So the end result you'll see is the headlands and trombolos, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but that's actually going to increase the amount of public beach access. It's going to protect wetlands that are behind this, that are very ecologically significant, and it's going to allow people to come on, and there'll be interpretive signage and environmental program associated with climate resilience and how natural communities in nature also lead to healthy communities for people. And moving on to another climate challenge, increasing temperatures, looking through an equity lens, urban heat islands. Urban heat islands are also often caused by the uneven, inequitable spread of land covers in the urban landscape, leading to more heat absorbing buildings and pavements and fewer cool spaces with trees and greenery. Residents of urban heat islands are more likely to experience heat-related illnesses and death, and related effects include worse air quality and higher cost of air conditioning bills. And you can see on the slide I have there the difference it makes in terms of the heat. So this also applies to the elite gymnastics concreted area that we were talking about. But what we did is we zoomed out and looked at the entire county. And as it turns out, Charles County Public Schools are really disproportionately affected in the Waldorf area by these heat islands. So if you look at the slide with the blue colors, that's the level of impervious surface. The darker the blue, the more impervious surface. And you can see how that then relates directly to red band heat islands. So what we did is we partnered with Charles County Public Schools and the Maryland Forest Service as part of the 5 Million Trees effort. And we have been, the grants for these are cyclical. So every 6 months we apply for the MDOT Urban Tree Program grants and the Maryland Urban and Community Forestry Committee grants. So far we've planted 115 trees at individual schools. And it's quite an undertaking because we're not just going in and planting them. The kids are involved in it as an educational opportunity. And for them to learn how trees relate to climate resilience, from carbon sequestration to cooling the air for urban heat islands, slowing down rainwater. And lastly, and this is an overarching effort that affects all of the projects we're doing, is our Resilience Forward Race Ahead initiative. So that's the Charles County Resilience Authority Youth Corps. We have partnered with the Student Conservation Association. If you haven't heard of them, they're the ones that host AmeriCorps and a number of other corps throughout the country. So we have partnered with them. And our first Resilience Authority Youth Corps actually got started in November with the first 75 trees we planted. So they do a school year Saturday service program where they water the trees, mulch them, stake them, but then they also receive career ladder training. We have folks come in and talk to them about jobs in forestry, you know, what that takes in terms of what kind of school are you looking at, jobs in parks and rec. And this coming week, we're having somebody come from the Department of Natural Resources to also talk about careers there. And this is paid free job training. So these kids come on Saturdays, they receive $15 to $18 an hour to take care of the trees and then also learn more. So this year, we're really trying to expand the program. We have applied through the Student Conservation Association for 3 members through the Maryland Serves program. And we also applied, I just interviewed a great candidate for the CBT Conservation and Climate Corps to become part of that. They'll act as crew leaders to help with the high school kids. And we would like to make this a year round. So school year Saturday, full-time summer crew, and then also a forestry internship for the young adults. So paid free job training, climate resilience, career ladder development for local high school students, young adults. And I already covered this, monitor and maintain newly planted urban tree canopies. Also, when our stormwater parks are put in, they'll be helping care for them. They're going to work alongside both the county parks and rec and foresters to develop new climate adaptive county parks in environmental justice areas. As I already mentioned, they'll be establishing the community air quality monitoring program. And they'll be working with New Hope Community Outreach Service to develop a community climate resilience hub that's focused on food deserts and establishing an urban tree canopy in an area of Waldorf. And also, they'll also be working on getting the communities out to engage in these stakeholder meetings and to help them understand what's going on. Like, for example, when the county does its master planning process. To make sure they're involved and, you know, we're all looking at it from the viewpoint of equitable climate resilience. And in the future, I would love to, this is something I did at DNR, a climate resilience land conservation easement monitoring that they'll be trained to do. So that is it for me. And thank you so much for letting me part of this.
You're very, very much welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
All right, Secretary McElwain, thanks for the opportunity, Brian. Thanks for setting this up. My name is Matt Fleming. Felt weird to come in here and not say Matt Fleming from Maryland DNR. For those that know me, I apologize. For those that don't, I spent 25 years participating in this group. I was a coastal planner, largely most of the time at DNR. And Secretary McElwain, I will, there's so many, all the new secretaries, there's so many committed professionals I had the joy of working with in my time at DNR. An opportunity to work groups like this and the work groups were by far some of the most enjoyable. So thank you for this opportunity. So next slide. So first, real quick, and this is a term, resilience, I think it gets used a lot and thrown around a lot. So I just want to kind of give it a little bit of context and how we talk about it within the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, and Stacy's on my board. You know, for example, my kids say they don't have any RIS. They're talking about not being prepared for climate change. But it's, you know, in our board, we talk about it's more about withstanding stresses. It's about our capacity to prosper under a variety of circumstances. So as you'll see in our initial project portfolio and hopefully future ones, you'll see projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, mitigate the impacts of change that are already underway or anticipated, and then also projects that foster social cohesion and inclusion. So next slide. So I don't want to repeat some of the things that you heard from Dan, Mark, and Stacy. So there's a couple quick differences between the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County and what you heard from Stacy. is one, we're regional in nature, so we can work across jurisdictional boundaries. We are a nonprofit, but we're not a 501c3. We opted not to go that route due to the various financial stress tests. What's considered, we're a government instrumentality, so we can be a nonprofit, but also we can work on behalf of the city and the county. And another, just one point, I saw Jesse Iliff on here. I think the difference, and I apologize, Stacy, but Anne Arundel County and the city of Annapolis, there's a wide variety of strong local environmental groups, watershed groups, environmental groups, civic groups that may not exist in Charles County. I may not be able to drive to Charles County after saying that, but so what I think what that opportunity provided us is, not having, using those partnerships that exist, don't recreate the wheel. So where we can leverage those partnerships and get money into projects through those partnerships is where we've really tried to focus. So I won't go through our vision and our mission, but really I think our success as a group is really going to be defined by, our ability to secure revenues outside, independent revenues, so lessen the burden on the local tax base, our ability to accelerate the pace and process of planning, designing, funding, completing projects than traditional, and then obviously the number of communities that we help with positive physical changes. So it's all about the projects. A year ago when I started, I promised the county exec and the mayor and my board members that we'd accelerate the process. We would ensure that we were in the front line for funding. We're in a historic moment in time right now with some of the federal and state funding that exists. We want to begin the process of construction within the first year, and then where we can, let's start, looking at, because we can work outside of jurisdictional boundaries, where can we foster projects that have kind of that regional lens. So that's kind of where we focus. So kind of looking, next slide, looking at how we did, and since I'm telling the story, it's going to be really great. So, first off, the goal was to get the structure up and running. So that was the main focus of the first year. Let's make sure that we have the framework in place so that we can create this model that can be used in other jurisdictions. Second, there was, luckily, coming into Anne Arundel County and the city of Annapolis, I'm sure Stacy as well in Charles County, there's so much work that has happened at the local level in partnerships, both the state agencies, planning work, whether it's hazard mitigation plans or nuisance flood plans that have been done by the Department of Planning. So, let's not recreate the wheel. So where can we build off those planning opportunities? So we went through and working with Dan's help, did a deep dive of all the different planning documents that exist. Where are those projects that could potentially be shovel ready in the next 1 to 3 years? And that would put us in the front lines for some of the federal funding that exists. Then we went through and looked at all the different funding sources through the BIL and the IRA. And of those shovel ready projects, what are those programs that we could potentially compete for? And there was something over like 400 different programs that were available to us to compete for. Then we, over the past year and a half with Stacy's help, we secured nearly $32 million, actually over now, $32 million worth of funding from outside sources for these projects. And we're currently seeking an additional $124 million of projects in the queue. Next slide. I won't run through this, but this is kind of our initial project portfolio and where some of the sources of funding came from. And starting off the bat, our strategic plan was, certainly we have to figure out more sustainable sources of revenue for our projects, but we need to focus right now on establishing a project portfolio, stitching these projects together that would allow us to compete for these federal and state dollars. So that's where our focus was. Obviously this is going to have to evolve over time. But we focus on a grant strategy, and that's what you'll see here. And what you'll see here in these projects is a pretty wide variety, if you can read it, but wide variety of projects, certainly with the natural resource background, opportunities where I could tie in, looking at some of the stormwater projects, but tie in opportunities to look at incorporating projects that also help to meet our climate goals. Things like where we can incorporate floodplain restoration, reforestation to some of the traditional stormwater projects. A lot of community infrastructure projects. We are assisting the city and the county with the implementation of the EV infrastructure. So a whole variety from, private restoration to public restoration work to working on energy, helping the county and the city make that transition to renewable energy sources. So happy to talk about any of these projects at a later date. Next slide. One of the things I did want to just take a breath and spend some time here. And, I think the long-term sustainability is to find revenue sources outside traditional grants. Certainly grants are an important piece of what we do, and helping the city and the county manage, implement projects through these grants, also go after grants. However, one of the, trying to look at other revenue sources, one of the things that we did right off the bat, we were one of the 6 communities selected for what's called the Putting Assets to Work project. 6 communities across the country that included, Atlanta, Georgia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Cleveland, Ohio, Harris County, Texas, and Lancaster, California. But what it did is working with the Governor's Finance and Officers Association and the Sorensen Institute, Sorensen Impact Center, we looked at and evaluated all the potential public properties that existed in the city and the county that could be potentially managed, operated, and run in a certain way that would provide revenue for larger community benefits. Great example is this picture here, which is the Annapolis, a garage in Annapolis. For many, many years, I know in my time at DNR, there's been a lot of plans to try to address a lot of the flooding issues down in City Dock. One of the issues was kind of getting the money started, getting that initial influx of dollars. And the solution was the city also knew that they had to rebuild this garage. They knew they had this huge resilience project in the queue. So that actually Dan's working with the city and the county is how to tie the restructuring, the rebuild of this garage with providing funding for the City Dock Resilience Initiative. So what was done is the city entered into a public-private partnership in which the concession payments, for managing that garage is helping to pay off a debt that a bond that the city took out. So they're providing up to about $25 million to kind of get that project started. So it's that thinking with this, using this example, that looking at all the different properties in and around Anne Arundel County and the city of Annapolis. So that's just one example of a different potential revenue source that we're exploring. Next slide. Looking forward to year 2. Certainly finish what we started. We have $32 million worth of projects in the queue. We got to show that we can manage these projects, get them in the ground. So that's one of our main focuses this year. Continue to look at that. We have a 1 to 3 year grant portfolio strategy. So let's build out that 2nd year grant portfolio. The piece and my former colleagues at DNR, we always talked about random acts of resilience or random acts of restoration. That used to drive me nuts. So trying to look at working with the city and the county to develop what we're calling Resilient and Ready Anne Arundel. And that's what are this integrated portfolio of projects that aimed at addressing some key resilience outcome goals. We're making sure that we're doing the best projects first, and how those could work together in concert. So that's one of the things we're undertaking. The next one would be Fort Meade. This is an opportunity with Department of Defense. Is Anne Arundel County and the city of Annapolis, we partnered. We have the Naval Academy within our boundaries. We partner with the Naval Academy to develop what's called a military installation readiness and resilience plan, MIRR. That is a planning effort to look at all the potential vulnerabilities as it relates to resilience outside of the fence wall of the Naval Academy, and how we can go after DoD dollars to implement those projects, things like road flooding, evacuation routes, connectivity and such. We're now taking that thinking and trying to work in partnership with Fort Meade, again, looking at opportunities outside of the fence wall there. And the last, Jennifer here on my left would try to echo this, is there's 530 miles of private shoreline in Anne Arundel County. This is something I know in my time at DNR, we were trying to figure out how to address. And there's, how do we do the right projects in that kind of tidal interface? So, and since so much of it is privately owned, how can we figure out how to catalyze the right projects in the right places with investment, either public, initial public investment, but do it in a fair and equitable way. So that's something that we're going to be focusing on over the next year. I think that's it. Let's try to get it done on time. Well done. Thank you. All right. Questions? We have time for questions, or we?
So time, Madam Chair.
Yeah, we can. I was just gonna say something. Jim.
One or two quick ones for Matt and one for Stacy. Matt, explain the instrumentality question. I mean, are you quasi-independent in terms of Anne Arundel County and Annapolis? I'm trying to figure out how you fit legally and structurally.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to go through that in more detail. We had
Briefly, 25 words.
So yeah, it's a tough one. So in IRS code, there's something called a government instrumentality. So in our enabling legislation, we're considered a government instrumentality of both the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. We have a ruling that we're waiting for from the IRS to allow so that private entities that provide money can get a tax as tax deductible, but we can operate as a quasi-independent agency of both the city and the county.
Okay. Do they have veto power, or do they have seats on your board?
Yeah. So the county exec, so 9 members from the county are appointed by the county exec, and 3 for the city of Annapolis.
That's 12. How many are on your board?
That's like 12.
Oh, so they have controlling interest.
Yes.
In other words, if they say this is a bad idea, they can nix it.
So we're independent. We're run by a board, so we're independent of the board. So I'm trying to think of the question. Yeah,
If the county executive doesn't like something that Matt does or the board does, he or she is more than welcome to appoint somebody else to the board when their time is up.
Okay.
That's very similar to other infrastructure financing authorities across the country, has a very similar relationship.
Okay, and one more quick one for Matt. The proposal to rebuild the dock area, are you involved in that, or is that all the city?
Yeah, I am involved with that. Yes.
Okay, and I had one real quick one for Stacy. The Pope's Creek.
Yes.
You started by saying there's sea level rise and flooding, and you're changing it to a beach and a park. So I'm trying to figure out the effect on sea level rise and the flooding of this new park. I'm trying to understand how that's going to work and how frequent it floods.
Yeah, sure. So we did the whole analysis. One of the things that Charles County Resilience Authority does, just like the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel, is we work off of planning documents that have already been done. Charles County in 2018 did a shoreline assessment of how the different, this is along the Potomac. So, very technical, very detailed in terms of how flooded it will be. So when we submitted this NOAA application, so the county bought the property. They want to open it up as a nature park. They do understand that there is flooding. It is not, they won't be drowned lands, which is a difference here. So by the technique that we proposed to NOAA, with the professional contractor, of course, is to be able to protect all of that infrastructure and build out from the shoreline, which also then provides more public access space as well.
The tombolos, the design of the tombolos.
Yeah.
So it's meant to so there's a lot of sediment in the system. So it's meant to capture sediment coming up and down. So it actually accretes sediment as it moves out, and by design, not using hard structures as you get overwashed with high tides or whatever. And the designs are done that with using the University of Maryland's estimated seal rod, the most recent one. So as you get overwashed, as that tide recedes, it's meant to withstand. You'll lose sediment, and that's okay. It's just, so it's by the design, it's meant to accrete sediment moving up and down in the system.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, we're gonna have to move on shortly, but please.
Just exceptional work, and obviously these counties are ahead of the other counties, and we hope it'll be a model for other counties. So I just wanted to lift up a couple of concerns that I had for counties writ large as they think about these issues. The first of which is that if we do an analysis, as Kim has done, of the voting patterns, we see that a lot of the coastal counties are voting against their own interest in terms of resiliency. And so I'm hoping that you both, as model counties, can help educate some of the other coastal counties on why voting differently in the legislature might be to their advantage. Stacy, as you talked about people who were disproportionately impacted, I heard about place and race, but I didn't hear about people with disabilities and chronic health conditions. So I'm hoping that all counties will take that into account. Just wanted to compliment Anne Arundel County and Annapolis for suing the fossil fuel industry for the damage that they have done. And I'd like to encourage all counties to engage in litigation and also using the new tools to see whether methane or other things are coming, whether it's NASA or other people providing data so that we can enforce environmental laws that already exist. Also wanted to point out that there's a scientist at the University of Pennsylvania that is about to come out with a new TED Talk, very exciting, about heat pumps in schools and how, from a cost perspective, they're the most effective thing that you can do to help reduce asthma and also enable the school year to stay longer, because then you get air conditioning in your schools and you're obviously electrifying. So I'm wondering if heat pumps can be a core part of county strategies in your schools. And then finally, because we're predicted to have hurricanes this summer, I'm hoping that all counties are ready with a PR effort to encourage the public to do more, not only for their own resiliency, but change their behaviors to help reduce climate change when that becomes a media moment that will help put a focus on climate issues. So thank you for the extraordinary work that you're doing.
Thank you for that. Appreciate your comments as well as your questions. We'll give you a second, Rebecca. I see your hand up. I just want to say, well, first, thank you for the presentation, Josh. Your team did a great job.
I was
of
listening.
course.
I heard Matt volunteer to be on all of our boards.
He did. I do want to just repeat again that we do need to continue to find solutions and work together when it comes to reducing pollution. It is so important, and investments are key. As we all know, the United States strategy, the administration, the Biden administration, that is the strategy. The strategy is to invest. That's really the only way we can reduce pollution and really try to meet our climate goals. So we talked about this last year when we met. We talked about the importance of investments in Maryland. We highlighted it as well in our plan about the importance of investments, but it's really important to make sure that we're paying attention to those low income areas or high income areas that are overburdened in other ways, right? It's not just about income and race, it's all factors. But we need to make sure we're keeping that in mind as well, because as we all know, we cannot leave anyone behind. And as we're transitioning in this green transition. So I just wanted to make sure I put my own plug in that we as a commission need to think about investments even more and making sure we're taking advantage of federal dollars, grants, loans, whatever it is, whatever it takes, as well as our own state funding as well. So thank you for really highlighting that and pointing it out. I'm going to give Rebecca a second to make a quick comment, but I wanted to turn it over to you. Now that you're here, if there's anything you want us to hear or say on your great presentation.
Thank you. I can't take any credit. This is fantastic work. And I think the important thing to take away from this conversation is the incredible opportunity for innovation that's happening right now. And it's happening because of the work that frankly you all are doing, and the creative approach, right? That conversation about, who makes up the board, quasi this, right? There's a lot of innovative components to this related to government structure. I think that's, it's a fun thing to discuss. But to your point, Secretary McElwain, the funding piece, right? It's how we leverage, it's how we create more financial pathways for us to achieve more resilience in our communities. And also meets many other goals, right? We heard about 5 million trees. We heard about how it helps mitigate the impacts of climate change. It also helps reduce emissions. So I think this is a really fascinating and fantastic space for us all. I'm really glad that you were all able to present to us today. And I think it's work that really has that global benefit, but also very much that local benefit. And I think it's a really exciting time to be working with you all as we continue to build out these opportunities in other spaces. So
I
thank you
agree.
and apologize for being on the phone to begin with.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you, thank you. Secretary Flora, you had a quick comment?
Yeah, I'll keep it real quick. Really more for the commission. So first of all, thank you. I think this is a great model. It's really very similar to like redevelopment authorities, which I'm very familiar with, that same kind of structure. For the commission, we have to be a little cautious about a county by county approach. I think we really need to look at regionalism on this, and you're going to be hearing a lot of this from me on all fronts. But like, if you look at the Eastern Shore, or if you look at Western Maryland, or you look at different parts of our state, how we can, and I don't know if the statute allows this, but how we can be really thinking about it, really, kind of like our metropolitan transportation authorities, things like that, is how do we, really not necessarily do one of these in every county, but really think about what are those regions that we need to really center around, particularly in some of those areas. And then I think ensuring that as we talk about this is climate resiliency, because there's a whole other broader topic of resiliency that I think we also have to be cautious about, realizing that there's a broader issue of resiliency. And so I feel like these are great models, and how we think about those as a commission for the rest of the state, really kind of considering those aspects to it, and maybe cautiously see how this unfolds. But I think the model, knowing and having worked for a redevelopment authority in my past, it's a great financing model. And I think we really want to advance that. The other thing is development standards. Are you all looking at all at how we, within that, as an authority, be able to advance best practices in development, so we can kind of get in front of this and basically try to avoid, situations that should never occur at all in terms of how we develop? And then will you be positioned to deal with like buyouts, for instance, where we need to retreat? So a lot packed in there. I just wanted to put it on the record, and maybe we can talk more later.
Yeah, and then just on those last two pieces, I know we're.
Yes, we are.
But just real quick, so we are involved in the 24 of the counties and the city's long range growth plan, the comp plan. So incorporating climate and climate resilience into that plan on a regional basis. One of the things we are working with their central services and helping to develop, while looking at building energy standards, trying to incorporate resilience and energy building standards into that piece. So both on a site level and on an individual project level. And the last piece was going to be awesome. I forgot what it was.
Finance, regionalism, development standards. I think we call it, but I know we've got to move on.
Okay.
Buyouts.
Yeah, so that's something, Department of Natural Resources with their their program open space, looking at, the climate adaptation easements. That is something that we're certainly be exploring with those guys there as well.
I think you made a very good point, Secretary. We do need to look at collaboration and partnerships, and county by county, and everyone's doing things differently. And it can look like some counties are advancing and some are being left behind. So just keeping that really at the forefront of everything that we're trying to do for Maryland as one is something that we all need to pay attention to. I have to turn it over to Administrator Belton, who has his hand up. We're gonna let you give us your last comment for this discussion anyway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it really is just one question for Dan to kind of close out the session. And, what advice might Dan have for Maryland County that's considering developing a resilience authority, to kind of get in on some of this action with this organization that can do so much? In other words, where would one begin? Because I think there are some counties that would like to hear that.
Well, I would begin by making an offer to Matt or Stacy to leave their county and come to wherever it is. Just.
So it's settled.
You got to, first of all, have an understanding of the scale of the problem that you're talking about. To put this into perspective, for these two counties to just address their storm drainage problem, you're going to be talking about hundreds, if not billions of dollars in the financing system. These are genuinely financing institutions. So get a better understanding of the scale of the problem, have a clear understanding of what your revenue desires are and where you want that money to come from. And then just figure out what meets your sensibilities when it comes to governance structure. You heard about how these two institutions are functioning very differently, what makes the most sense for your community. And then finally, should you do it in the first place? This is not a panacea. There are places like the Eastern Shore and others. Keep in mind, Matt has a multi-jurisdictional authority that he's running. So multiple jurisdictions will make a lot of sense in a lot of places. So I hate to say it, but study it. You know, figure out exactly what you want to do. Don't study it for a year, study it for a few months, and then take action and make it happen. Thank you. I really do appreciate you being here. It's taking me about an hour to get to my car right now, so I gotta go.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Water bottle down there.
thank you all. So we're gonna turn it over. I'm gonna turn it over now to Kim and Mike. You can talk about the legislative session. I'm turning it over to you.
Okay,
Want to start, Ken?
sure. So we have a PowerPoint that we're gonna kind of walk through. But there's some larger picture messages that I want to make sure that I'm delivering around this. So this isn't so much a by bill analysis as it is the bigger picture in terms of our commission work and our long range work here. So I'm going to jump in, and Mike is going to be the color commentary on everything I say. As you let's see, next slide. Okay, there's our agenda, but the next one. So Secretary McElwain talked about the change in the membership, which is great, and I think it adds value to the commission. For those of us that have been around this commission for a while, it is gaining more importance and stature and taking up more space, and really pleased with the leadership that the commission provides to the administration and to the General Assembly. And I think with the addition of the treasurer and the PSC reps and the emergency management, that'll continue. So these are good additions. And, you know, just when you're feeling overwhelmed and there's another commission meeting, really actually be proud of yourself, because you're making a difference. Next slide. So the department put out the climate pollution reduction plan in December, and compliments to the department for an excellent plan. And I did read all 100 and some pages of it, so riveting. But it was great. And basically that plan says, here's how we're going to achieve our goals that the state has committed to, which is 60% reduction by 2031 and net zero by 2045. I believe it was page 94, 97 of the plan. There were a list of legislative recommendations, things that should be done rapidly to get the plan in place and to move forward with it. And there were 6 of those. 2 of them moved forward, 4 did not. And we'll talk a little bit about it, but I think it's important to take a look at this. And again, if this commission is working towards achieving the goals, how are we going to do it without funding? How are we going to do it without looking at low income, overburdened communities? You know, how are we going to do it without incentivizing things? And so coming back to these really lends the question in my mind is, you know, where do we go from here? And we made some incremental progress that I think is significant, and we'll share that in a minute. But we also, frankly, stood still and went in the wrong direction in a couple of cases. So let's go to the next slide. This one, work off my thing here. So these are the bills that passed, and you can say, wow, you know, that's a pretty impressive climate agenda. And the first one is the removing the exemption for manufacturers, which that was a recommendation from the mitigation work group. It
was a recommendation from the commission that was in the climate plan and that did get through. So there's progress there, for sure. And, it reflected, some compromise early on that the commission supported and ended up getting passed. The next one that was a recommendation of the climate plan that also passed was the Empower program. And the Empower program is a really important energy efficiency program. MEA does a great job of administering it. It needed to be updated, needed to be reformed, so it is the most effective way of meeting our energy efficiency needs. So that passed. So those were the two that were recommended in the climate plan that passed. So we were really pleased about that. Funding was not passed and it was not addressed, except that early in the session, the governor reallocated $90 million of CEF money to go to 3 climate programs. One was electric school buses, 17 million, 23 million to multifamily dwelling units for EV charging stations, and then 50 million for building electrification. So there was some, and everybody acknowledged, including the governor, that it was, the first step. It was an increment, one step forward. So not meant to be the panacea, not meant to solve everything, but it was a step in that direction. So we worked hard to keep that, the allocations, and the General Assembly did pass the 90 million with the original allocation that the governor put in. So you can see, there was some EV bills, there was the offshore wind and geothermal. So our renewables saw some progress. There was a bill on the I always get the name wrong. This solar bill.
Brighter tomorrow.
Thank you. I keep thinking it's beautiful tomorrow or something. Brighter Tomorrow Act. That was a bill that relative to solar. So the renewables got some nice steps forward, a pilot study on geothermals and the offshore wind deployment. So we can talk about any of those that you want. But let's go to the next slide and then we'll kind of open it up for discussion. These are the bills that didn't pass and that were stalled. And I too want to echo what Secretary McElwain said, that honestly, the hero of the session was Delegate Stein, who put forward so many climate bills, and we worked closely together on trying to advance what we've in many ways felt were bills that should have passed and were low-hanging fruit. But they didn't. And you have to take each of these and kind of wonder why things didn't move forward. There were 3 or 4 funding related bills. There was the Renew Act. There was the Cap and Invest, almost like a study that enabled MDE to look at that program. There was a transport fee, and Delegate Stein put all these bills in, and none of those moved forward. And so revenue was not an option this year. And yet we're not going to meet our climate goals without revenue sources. And so here we are stuck. Yeah, it's a tough one. Maybe we'll just, and then
You can tell me when you want me to give any color commentary.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, look, and I make these comments in view of the fact we got Dana sitting down there who really was in the room where it happened, and I'm just an observer. I do think we have to start by recognizing that Maryland's goal is the most aggressive in the country, right? The 60% by 2031, no other state has that. And so we have a pathway report that is in order to meet those goals, also one of the most aggressive and assertive in the country. And I think my sense is that in the legislature, there is this concern about what are they committing to? And part of that, I think, is we're facing the structural deficit on the budget and also experience on the blueprint for education, where clearly good causes, and now we have to figure out how to pay for it and what are the implications of what was passed. And so I do think there is concern within the legislature about what's going to be involved. Remember that the pathway report calls for, and it's pathway singular, not pathways, because what it was saying was this is the only way to get to the standard. It called for $1 billion of additional money at a time when the state's facing a huge structural deficit. It called for the building energy performance standards are somewhere between 15 and 25 billion, depending on who you listen to, in costs for building owners to meet the standards. We're talking about electric vehicles, which are currently around 1% or less of the vehicles registered in Maryland, and trying to get them to a very high number. We're talking about going to all clean energy at a time when PJM is saying that if we close the last remaining coal plant, we'll have some blackouts or brownouts in Baltimore if we close it in 2025, and it will cost $800 million to upgrade a transmission line to bring in power from outside the state. And whether you agree with all those or whether you think the things that can be fixed or not, they're all issues that I think make the legislature cautious. And so one of the things we've got to go forward with thinking, I believe, in my opinion, is are there areas where if we cannot get everything that's in the climate plan, we should look at a plan B. If we can't get $1 billion a year, should we look and say, okay, what would we do with 500 million or 400 million or some other number? And that's controversial. I know there are people who think that talking about something other than what's in the pathway report would be a concession that we can't get to 60% by 2031. For me, it's you ought to have a plan B in case you don't get plan A. But that is an issue I know that within the mitigation working group we are wrestling with. And it is something that the commission may want to give some thought to. But on the bigger picture, I think the uncertainty on the budget issues, concern about what they're committing to, all impacting, particularly the energy use. And I'll just pick the first example on this as a final suggestion. The EV-ready standards for multifamily buildings largely failed because there could not be an agreement on what percentage of parking spaces had to be EV-ready. What's going to be a very, very high percentage, a very low percentage, a percentage that changed over time. And because there couldn't be an agreement on the correct number, I believe that's the major reason that bill did not pass. I don't understand why point of sale rebates couldn't pass. Waste incineration is something that's been introduced for 10 years and hasn't passed. But there are individual reasons on most of these things, but I do think there is a cautiousness within the legislature on this issue.
Surprisingly, I couldn't agree more. And I think this commission needs to grapple with that. And there was a bill on the transport fee bill was not $1 billion. It was 350 million or something. And couldn't get that any movement. So there was a plan B for funding that there was enabling MDE to look at cap and invest. And I don't think it made it anywhere. And so I don't think anybody, I'll speak for myself at least, I am not advocating that we have to go, that we need everything right now at $1 billion, and we do need to make progress. But I will say that the reluctance on the General Assembly is very real in my mind, and it is a bit daunting, especially when the rest of the when there's so many concerns and whatnot. I think yeah, maybe I'll,
Finish. See the next slide, we can open up for.
yeah. So let me go to the next slide and then we can open it up for discussion and I'll get off my soapbox. Probably not, but that's a nice goal. So these were two areas that were definite setbacks. The EV registration was really fascinating. You know, there was a recommendation that we incentivize EV purchasing through reduced registration fees for EVs, and the General Assembly was looking for revenue and saw that this source, you know, the EV purchasers are not paying gas tax, they're not paying for road work, so we got to make sure that EVs are contributing. The rebuttal that was, sure, we'll be happy to contribute, but let's raise everybody then, so that there is still an incentive built in. That didn't go anywhere, and there was just an inability to really even consider it. And then the last bullet was a 11th and a half hour move by the Speaker's office through the Budget Committee to put an amendment in that rolls back MDE's work on building energy performance standards. And this is very controversial and I think will be debated widely for some time ahead. But this is, you know, one could argue that this puts the building energy performance standards on hold until there's clarity provided to the agency on how to move forward with it. The other argument or the other point is that, you know, this was done without any input, any discussion, any exposure, any daylight. And so I won't speak for the agency except to say there's probably a question moving forward about, you know, do you put 2 years into developing a regulation when in a, you know, late night backroom deal, it gets rolled back. So that one was a pretty sobering way to end the session for me personally. So, but I will turn it to my colleague who will provide color on that.
Yeah, I think that these two are examples, I think, of the feelings of caution within the legislature that I've perceived, right? They put a fee on EV adoption, and you're right, this commission recommended that we increase the amount of incentives for EV because currently, because the average car stays on the road for 15 years, simply having mandates of minimum number of purchases for EV are not going to get us to our climate goals. But because of concern about the revenue in the transportation fund and the fact that EVs don't pay the gas tax, the legislature went in the opposite direction. The building energy performance standards, you know, I've opposed the EUI portion of that right from the beginning here. So obviously I have a different perspective on that, but the legislature obviously was concerned with the impact of that, the EUI standards on the housing, multifamily housing in the state and commercial building. And I think both of them are examples of the legislature being concerned about, are we being too aggressive or not? And again, I think the message I would suggest to the commission is you have to consider whether this is an all or nothing, or whether there is ways to make progress that don't necessarily put on the table the most aggressive solution. The EUI is an example of when the legislature, and certainly my colleague here to my right was the key sponsor of that, what came out for buildings had a lot of protections, if you will. It had language saying that the department would, to the maximum extent possible, provide flexibility. It would provide different standards based upon age of buildings, based upon the geographic location. It would have special provisions for buildings where the landlord didn't control the tenant's energy use. And the first draft of the regulations didn't have those things in it. So I do think there was a lot of concern within the legislature about did the regulations actually go down the route that had been defined. You can debate that one way or another, but I think the legislature, at least in the budget language, and in the fact that they had ALR hold the regulations, something that it rarely occurs, was a necessary concern.
All right, so, thank you. Thank you for that overview. And let's have a conversation about it for a couple of minutes. I want to just give my own perspective, my message to the commission, this is coming from me. And then, Delegate, I want to turn it over to you to see if you have any response to that. And then, Director Penske, I'd love to hear, your feedback, and then we're going to open it up. So what I heard is we, the state of Maryland, that we have the most aggressive climate goals in the country. Yes, that's true. We do. 60% is aggressive, more aggressive than the U.S. Climate Alliance, than the United States, than California. Yes. But also we have to remember that the goals that we have, which are reachable, which is 50% or 51% by 2031. Please remember that's aggressive too. But we can meet that goal, even if we did nothing right now. If we did nothing but continue down the road that we're traveling, we can at least meet the 51%. But we will not meet even that. And Maryland will not be the winner, but the loser if we don't continue with the regulations that we have right now that we need to push forward. If we stop and in legislative sessions, they pull back regulations that are already there, we will not meet even 51%. So we do need to, in my opinion, this commission, educate the legislator, the General Assembly legislators, everybody, that it's aggressive at 60%. But when you think about all the progress that we've made, we have to keep moving. For example, with BEPS, I won't get into that too much. BEPS is important, not for the 60%. That's for the 51%. So if they're thinking that some of these things are pushing us just way too far, you have to remember that first, it's already legislation. The Climate Solutions Now Act passed. That's the fact. It passed. So if you're going to change the law, that's one thing. But we have to educate the legislators that when we are doing these kinds of rollbacks at the last minute and we don't have a time to talk about it and explain what this means, like, for example, we should have been able to explain to the delegate, the senator, the speaker, whoever, that this is going to impact our ability to meet the basic, which is 51%. So I just want this commission to remember that while these things may seem aggressive, it's important that we move forward and doing what we need to do to meet the climate goals. Nothing is perfect, but we have to march forward. We need funding. We need investments. We need all these things. What we don't need is any effort to roll back the progress that we've already made. The laws that are already in place for us, for Maryland to win. So we need to figure out, do we want to adjust, adapt, and mitigate, be resilient to climate change, or we don't? I think we do. That's why we're all on this commission. We all care, and we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to educate and keep this momentum going. Delegate Stein?
No, thank you, Madam Secretary, and I appreciate the comments that have been made. I guess I first want to say that my sense is that, despite the fact that there was a mixed record on legislation this year, there is still a general commitment to the ambitious climate goals that we established in the legislature back in 2022. There wasn't any discussion about rolling back those standards, be it percentage reduction in direct emissions for buildings, the overall greenhouse gas reduction goals. As far as I could tell, absolutely no reduction. No talk of rolling those back. I think there were a couple issues that hampered movement on some of these bills. First, and I think as Mike alluded, the biggest issue that the legislature confronted was the twin deficits, really triple deficits that we face. There's the transportation deficit, there's the operating deficit, that's in good part connected to the blueprint, and then there's the climate funding deficit. The first two were the ones that obviously, took priority and were the subject of lengthy discussions between the House and the Senate. Those dominated the session. And perhaps took the oxygen out of the room when it came to talking about climate funding. And those issues were partly addressed this year by the legislature. They're not, the transportation and operating deficits, they're not going away. So they still may crowd out discussion even next year about climate funding. However, I will say that even though House Bill 1008, which had the fee on the transport of natural gas and coal, did not pass, at least in the House, it was taken seriously. And, I don't really want to speak out of turn here, but I think that we laid the groundwork for even more serious consideration of that measure next year. And also on the second item was the timing of the release of the climate pollution reduction plan. Now I understand, it was an ambitious schedule to even get it released by the end of 2023. And that's when it was released. But I think it left relatively little time for the legislature to digest it, especially the key legislative recommendations. We've really started discussing them in January, after the report was released. And I think that speaks to the fact that between now and next session, there's an educational opportunity for us with respect to what is recommended, for the legislature to do under the plan. And I know that, with respect to BEPS, a lot of feelings about, the budget language that was taken that especially focuses on EUI. And I'm not speaking for, the Speaker of the House here, but just my own impression is that should not be interpreted as throwing cold water on efforts to move the ball forward on climate action in other regulatory areas. I don't think that's the message at all. And also just to point out that while there was the budget language on buildings, at the same time with respect to EV standards, there was an effort by the automobile sector to try to roll back our commitment to complying with, it was Advanced Clean Cars 2, and that didn't happen. There was a bill that would have done that. That did not move forward. So, it is, I realize overall a mixed record on climate. I, for one, wish that there had been more bills, but I think that we have the opportunity to make more progress next year. And I would just suggest that, again, this year, because of the plan, the climate pollution reduction plan came out late, there was an opportunity to put together a strong legislative package to implement them. But now we have more time, and I would suggest that MDE and the legislature work together to plan that for next year.
Thank you, and definitely plan to do that.
Great.
Third year for me. I get it now. Let's turn it over to you, Director Fenske. Look like you've been waiting.
Yeah. This is a hard conversation.
I know.
I want to mildly disagree with my House colleague and longtime friend, Delegate Stein, and seriously disagree with my colleague to the left, Princess Darkness. But, and again, I want to fully support, Secretary, your comments about moving forward or rollbacks. I think you are absolutely on target on that. And Delegate Stein, while there might not have been an attempt to push back on the 60% reduction, You know, it's like with the dam. Even though you don't blow it up, if you start taking bricks from the base, it's going to weaken. And I see the EUI effort and some other efforts as pulling brick by brick by brick, which is an indirect attack on the 60%. So I think there is an attack on the 60%, but it's being done indirectly. And look, I am fully supportive of what's in the Climate Solutions Plan that NDE and the Secretary and our staff, Chris and Mark and everyone else worked on, calling for $1 billion. And that hasn't been funded. And that would move us forward. But I think the big challenge we're facing now are the rollbacks. So I don't want to say the talk of money is a diversion, but I think it's a little bit of a diversion because there are attacks on the climate solutions bill from sectors in our state. I want to be very clear about that. And look, example one is the EUI. There are at least two sectors that put that in, supported it. It didn't go through a bill hearing. And with all due respect, my colleague to the left, you're not simply an observer, you're a lobbyist. And so I just want to be transparent about that. And that came in at the 11th hour. And it really has the potential to push back implementation of the BEPS. And as the lead sponsor in the Senate and Delegate Stein obviously played the heavy lifting in the House, we had long discussions that besides having 30,000 foot conversations of reaching 60%, we put in some concrete objective responsibilities. And one was for large buildings, 35,000 square feet. At one point, it was 25,000 square feet. We compromised to 35,000 square feet to say, you've got to reduce 20% by 2030, and then in the out years, be net neutral, carbon net neutral. And part of that was the EUI. And the builders didn't like it then, they don't like it now. Because they're comfortable where they are and they don't want to change. And the utilities would like to keep it fairly where things are now. And so that is a concerted effort to push back against the Climate Solutions Now Act. This should be seen as nothing other than that. And Delegate Stein, you mentioned auto dealers making an effort. Well, while the legislation failed, if you start looking around our state and the nation and the advertising, the National Automobile Association, Dealers Association, they've started to push back. And it took me a while to understand it. But when you have an electric car, which I do, you don't need to take it in for service. And auto dealers do two things, they sales and service. And if their business in the service area goes down, it's one of their profit centers. And so while at least Toyota's been in the lead in not wanting all EVs, there's been a pushback in the auto industry, and there was legislation to do that, and I think it's going to rise. So this gets back to the brick by brick undercutting what we're trying to do in terms of shifting to EVs and infrastructure. And we know that transportation is a leading contributor, followed by buildings. So it's not a shock that those two sectors are leading this charge to reduce the bill. So I this might cost me, but I wanted to lay that out there. And there's one other issue that I think we have to talk about, which is an 800-pound gorilla, which has to be flagged for future conversations. And on the list, it had it as climate legislation. And that was regarding data centers. And I assume most people around the table read the article in the Washington Post that Loudoun County, Northern Virginia, is actually going to increase the burning of coal. Increase the burning of coal. Not only not use natural gas, not only not spurring the growth of clean energy, solar, wind, and other types. And that is a discussion item that is going to need to take place. And whether you like it or don't like it or whatever, I'm just suggesting that is a topic for future conversation. So thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
As we think about going forward and looking for better legislation next cycle, I just wanted to add a couple other things that I heard from legislators. One was they felt there were far too many bills, which put pressure on the elected not to have enough time for thoughtful hearings about the ones that matter. So I really think that it's important for us to coalesce around the most important things and to try and reduce things that are clogging the system and also undermining legislators' confidence in the fiscal notes because they feel there's not enough staff to do competent fiscal notes, that if there's fewer bills, that more people get around. And the environmental community was not all consistent in terms of what our priorities were. My personal top priority is funding for next cycle. And I think that, you know, setting that forward is important. Secondly, I heard from Chair Wilson that Renew was not going to move forward because he felt that the Attorney General's office didn't have adequate staffing for that kind of litigation. And that was very concerning to me. And I don't know whether that is true or not true, but I think that looking for funding for climate work that comes from the industry that caused the climate problem is something we need to really get on. And then I also wanted to request that we look at the Pathways report, which I was concerned about when it first came out because it had charts that had an assumption that everything was done on time and perfectly well. We know that solar, wind, EVs, et cetera, is not on track for any of it. And I would love to see new charts that say, where are we exactly, at least in terms of solar, wind, and EVs, and how that impacts our ability to achieve our climate goals.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments? You have a comment?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I know we have a few more agenda items to get to, but I think reflecting on the comments so far in the conversation, I was feeling pretty disheartened, which I was toward the end of session anyway, to be honest, just following it from afar. I wasn't in the halls for this year, but I think what made me feel that this commission needs to do is plan B work, but looking at it, I hear what happened in the session. I think we need to be real about, we're going to need more aggressive action then. If we're continuing to stall out on some efforts, if we're continuing to face potential rollbacks, the climate doesn't care. Our goals are still in statute. It means it's just going to be harder for us to achieve them down the road. And so I think that requires more aggressive recommendations, if anything. So I think that's something that we need to be considering here moving forward, because I think that's our job as the Climate Commission to say what needs to happen to meet these targets. And so I think if we're continuing to face that uphill, we need to be serious about, yes, understanding the gaps, as Commissioner Mizrahi just said, that are a result of continued slow walking or rollbacks, and what that means for us in terms of proposing next steps moving forward. I think that's what climate community will expect from this kind of commission. Plenty of other thoughts, but I'll leave it there for now.
I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Josh. You had, and then you had a comment, right? And then there's another person. David. I can't. And David. And then I'll make a final comment. I'll save mine. Josh.
Yeah, I think it strikes me that we just had this presentation and we're talking about finding more and more money to be able to protect our citizens and Marylanders against the impacts of the changed climate and the continuously changing climate. At the same time, we're having conversations about funding, not putting more funding into climate, right? We are paying this bill one way or another. We are paying this bill. And I think it's incumbent upon us to decide whether we want to pay it on the front end or whether we want to pay it on the back end. And if we want individual citizens to pay it on the back end. And at the end of the day, that's where we are. And this commission is going to be the one that leads in whichever direction we go.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Hold on.
So we have a hand up from David Lapp.
Hi, can you hear me?
We do hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks for all the presentations. Really enjoyed hearing from folks today. On the funding issue, I just wanted to flag what I think is a really important issue, especially on the building side. And on the building side, we generally have ratepayers who are funding a lot of initiatives on decarbonization initiatives. And what we have going on right now is ratepayers are putting tons of funding into electricity, but also fossil fuel infrastructure. And we've had a couple bills, and we've talked about it in the commission. I presented on it before. But when we talk about funding, we should also look at where the current funding is going. And right now, the state's gas utilities are spending in the neighborhood of $700 to $800 million every year on fossil fuel infrastructure. No one's saying that all needs to go away right away, but there's really a lack of planning going forward. And those costs are really, really significant. It's about 20 to 25% of Maryland's, the state of Maryland's entire capital budget for 2024. About 20 to 25% of that is going into fossil fuel infrastructure. And then we have programs like Empower, which we certainly need to help decarbonize. And we've talked about Empower on the commission as being fundamental to furthering beneficial electrification. But that program is also still funding significant fossil fuel expansion, really. We just issued a report showing that one of our gas utilities over the past few years incentivized 18,000 gas appliances in homes, 16,000 in new homes. And that's an expansion of the gas system. If you look at the Climate Pathways report, it says we need to make our fossil fuel, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and yet we're still going the other way. We had a modest bill at the General Assembly that didn't move on stride. And all that said is really, before we spend all this money replacing current gas infrastructure, we should consider cost-effective alternatives, which should already be being done. But we need to move these things forward because we're spending, all this money and going in the wrong direction. I just wanted to make sure that stays on, in people's minds as we go forward this next year. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make the last comment, then we're going to move on. We got another who actually have.
Secretary, if I could just make a quick comment from the DGS
Yes.
side.
Yes, please.
Comment on David's. So here at DGS, we're spending a lot of time looking at decarbonization. We just brought up consultants on board to help with planning for long-term for state facilities. All our capital projects, including large-scale renovations and new buildings, will be fully electrified. And as we look at new mechanical systems for buildings, we're looking at ways to electrify them as well. So we're looking at obviously new technology. I was talking with our team. I'm like, I grew up with a heat pump. It was never ever warm in the house, for many, many years when I was a kid, right? But technology's changed, right? And we're getting there. So I keep asking, are we there yet, right? Where we can actually go full electrification with these heat pumps and heat and cool these large buildings, right? Heat in particular. So I think we're there. We're getting there, and we're looking at the different technologies that are available. So certainly a lot will be changing, and I think these consultants we're bringing on board will help longer term planning for state facilities. But certainly as we bring these new buildings online, you'll see them all fully electrified.
Really happy to hear that.
Yep.
Hey, thank you so much. This is an important topic, and I know a lot, we probably can speak even more on this, but today we have to move on. But maybe another time we can have a different session. It may be even outside of this formal meeting, just a different meeting, so we can talk about a strategy. I'll leave the conversation with this. I was trying to figure out how to word this. So we need to stay strong as a commission. We need to be positive too. So for example, when last minute change in BEPS regarding EUI was made evident to us and we learned of it, we could have just given up and just really stomped out of this building. But what we did was say, okay, it's still the law. What do we need to do to move forward? Because we can't fail. EUI, the data that we needed to collect and do the analysis, we were going to do it anyway in 2026, right? Now we have to do it now. Now we're slowed down, but we're going to stay, this agency, we're going to stay positive, and we are determined to make sure that we are going to meet our goals, at least the 51%, but we're going to get to 60%, and we're going to work together with everyone. We're still not, the governor has said this, and I agree. We have to make sure we remember that we don't want to leave anyone behind. That means consumers, because as you said, consumers will pick up the tab if we can't get our act together and figure out funding and how to work together as partners to move the climate agenda forward, because we have to do that. The building industry, they have a voice too. All of this is going to cost them too. So we get that. So we have to keep that in mind too, as we're thinking about how do we work together, hopefully for some kind of win-win solution where we can meet our goals. So I'm just saying, let's stay positive moving forward. Let's think about our strategy next year for the legislative session and what we need to do as a commission. I will figure out what I need to do as secretary too, and all of us as partners, so we can move forward and not backwards. So let's just keep that in mind. Thank you. Now we're going to move on.
Yeah, and so maybe a timekeeping note, we can table the MDE updates
Yes.
to another meeting. Everyone has some slides on that. It's just the status of launching the 4 new working group. I'll give you the short version right now. 2 of them launching. I think the first meeting is later this week. 2 of them, we're filling out the last couple spots on the rosters. And then those working groups will launch very shortly as well. We can talk more about that at a later meeting.
Okay.
Dr. Dennison had an update from STWG. I'm very sorry, short on time.
I'll skip some slides, but I'm also going to ask Russ Dickerson to talk about a unique opportunity.
Oh, sure. I'll promise to be quick. Time me. So recently, the White House released a plan to pursue measurements and models, provide information on greenhouse gas emissions. The agencies responsible for carrying out this project, that's NOAA and NIST, called me up yesterday and said they're looking for a location for a test bed, a prototype for characterizing greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 and methane. And Chris and I agreed that the Baltimore, Washington area would be ideal. So, and Bill too. They're not seeking matching funds. Nothing is totally free. It'll require work, of course. But I think this is a great opportunity for MDE and DNR, because it'll help us characterize the emissions, evaluate emissions inventories of greenhouse gases and the associated pollutants that are so important for air and water quality, allow us to track progress and identify low-hanging fruit for making improvements. So all we need at this point is something like a one-pager that says DNR and MDE would use this information, how we would use it, and what would be most valuable to you, to us, that I can then forward to the agencies and the people that are going to actually make the measurements and run the models. So happy to answer any questions on that.
What's the timing?
Well, the report came out a couple of months ago. It'll be this summer. They're going to start making, well, some of the measurements are actually ongoing now, but they're going to expand soon.
Great.
It's great. I saw that this morning. Thank you for sending the information. It's a lot to read. The report was November 2023. I don't know if all of you have a copy. We can certainly, give that, forward that to everyone.
Yeah, I think, the PDF is available. I think we can put it into the minutes.
Okay.
At least, the address for downloading it. It's 70 pages, so I didn't print it off.
Thank you. We'll definitely, talk about.
So, I'll just skip most of these slides and just get to the bottom line. We talked about woody biomass and hydrogen. Those are our two topics so far. We've also been talking about, but leave that for another day. So we had point counterpoint in both cases. Woody biomass has been kicked around as a potential energy source, particularly Western Maryland. But if you jump to the summary of the a couple slides down, you'll and our wonderful Sea Grant policy fellow Christine Mountain put it together, is that we need to manage forests for a diverse set of goals. It's not a good idea to cut down a live forest stand to burn it. But that said, you could use byproduct waste forest products to burn that, and perhaps forest thinning for reducing forest fire. So there are times and places where getting woody biomass into a furnace to burn it would make sense. And there's some examples of small scale power plants that use that. And then I'll jump to hydrogen. Jonah at Johns Hopkins talked about what's going on in the hydrogen world. There are two main ways to get hydrogen. One, you can crack water, and second, you can take methane and bust it up. And the cleanest way to do it is cracking water, electrolysis. And it turns out there are hydrogen hubs created in the United States, and two of them are in the state of Maryland, the Appalachian and the Mid-Atlantic. So there's DOE's putting money into funding projects to look at hydrogen infrastructure. So we should be capitalize on that opportunity in Maryland. What would you do hydrogen for? Well, it turns out hydrogen is a big volume compared to methane. Methane is a much more efficient way to move hydrogen, to move energy, sorry. Hydrogen is something that could fit into the decarbonization strategy for Maryland. And in particular, burning methane is it's better than methane's a particularly potent greenhouse gas. If you burn it, it turns into CO2, and that's a little better, but still CO2. It's still not good. But if you decompose methane, if you make it into carbon and hydrogen, and then have hydrogen and carbon as products, that makes a lot more sense. And that's where the technologies, at the cutting edge. And there's a lab scale demo that Jonah showed us where you can precipitate out carbon in this furnace. Then what do you do with the carbon? That's another question. But all these, one thing about hydrogen production is it can be very small scale, and because you don't want to transport hydrogen very far, it makes sense to have a bunch of small scale hydrogen production facilities. So if we think about, and the final slide is how would it help in decarbonizing Maryland? We got to take those lab scale and see if you can scale that up to industrial scale, and using renewables or nuclear to power the decarbonization system using it makes sense. And then we got to figure out what to do with that solid carbon that you would generate. You can use hydrogen as a fuel source, but what do you do with the carbon? And there are opportunities using ag. You can use it in various new industries. It's pure. It's a black powder carbon. So it's going to be. I think hydrogen is something that's not going to play out. At one point, they thought we're going to have hydrogen fuel cells for cars, but electric's really taken that over. Toyota actually years ago decided not to go electric, go to hydrogen. They'd lost that battle and they've converted now to electric.
Oh, go ahead.
So basically, this is sort of emerging as in terms of the and that hydrogen hub funding may support the kind of research that we could use to look for how we could use electrolysis to generate hydrogen and create this fuel. So that, and then next time I can talk about methane and a little bit more about that. And there's a connection with the hydrogen as well.
I think we should learn more about this. Too bad we couldn't have the full briefing, but I'm interested in hearing more. Hydrogen is so expensive. That's one of the reasons why, as you know, it's probably not getting the traction it deserves, but it's really expensive.
Yeah.
I do know that DOE is investing a lot of money, billions. So I have questions like, I'm just not sure of who's even willing to invest in it. I know you said Maryland should take advantage of the funding. I just need to learn a little bit more about that myself personally. But this is great. This is great. Any questions regarding that before we open up for public comment? Any questions about hydrogen and what we can do in Maryland?
We'll reserve some time on the next meeting agenda to
Yeah,
follow up
let's
on
do
this
that.
and to give it more time. Okay, so appreciate everyone for just another minute or two. As a reminder, if there are any members of the public who want to comment, please put your name in the chat. I have not seen any yet. Oh, yes, we do have one. And then in the room, show of hands, anyone offering public comment in the room? Okay, yes, one in the room. Okay, so we'll start with the one in the room and then we'll turn to the one online.
Hello, my name
And
is
if you
Jamie DeMarco.
mind moving a little bit closer for the microphones in the center of the room. Thanks, Jamie.
Hello, my name is Jamie DeMarco. I'm the Maryland Director at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. I just want to give additional praise to the great resiliency presentation that was given earlier today and the counties that are really leading on not just solving climate change, but also surviving climate change and surviving it equitably. I also want to really appreciate what you said about we're paying it. It's only a question of whether we and all of our taxpayers are going to pay for this, or we're going to make the big international you didn't quite say this, but the other option is to make the big international fossil fuel companies who knew and lied about this crisis pay for the cost that we are currently paying for to adapt to and survive climate change. We think the RENEW Act, the Responding to Emergency Needs from Extreme Weather Act, that would charge the largest international fossil fuel companies $900 million a year for 10 years. That revenue would come to Maryland to be used for investing in climate resiliency projects that we absolutely need to survive climate change.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. And online, we have Jeff Silva.
Hello.
Jeff, welcome. We hear you.
Hi. Excellent. Thank you for hearing my comment. It's Passover. Wasn't it before Exodus that Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream about 7 fat cows followed by 7 emaciated cows? Joseph told Pharaoh there was to be a 7-year famine not only in his kingdom, but in all kingdoms. Pharaoh was told to prepare for that famine. He believed Joseph's interpretation by ordering the building of more government food storage facilities and instructed the farmers to send their surplus to his royal storage warehouses and not export for short-term profit. To fulfill the statute of 60% greenhouse gas reduction obligation, all the Maryland computer simulations for reductions of greenhouse gases from different came from different mixes of government policies that show taxes on fossil fuels and increase of fees on fossil fuel consumption provide the greatest gains of greenhouse gas reductions and funds for government programs designed to protect citizens from the destabilized climate destruction. But MCC did not recommend to raise gas taxes or raise registration fees on gasoline vehicles over 2 tons. How can now you mourn that the General Assembly didn't pass any funding for climate change solutions? Children play and cry. Adults practice risk management. Every MCC recommendation must push for taxes on fossil fuel use. Break, period, end of statement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silva. So that takes us through the agenda.
Okay. I'm afraid to say if there are any last comments. Might be here too late, sorry. All right, well, it's good seeing all of you again. I think this was a really good meeting. Lots more to talk about. I think it's time for us to adjourn. We'll just end it there. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I want to remind folks that there's going to be another meeting in this room. I'm just going to go bring in the food. And so people want to take a bio break. There's going to be food in just a second.
I didn't mean now.
For sure, absolutely.
We have a couple of power.
Okay.
Yeah.
Usually sit out for them.
So I just.
And I take your.
Sure, I can pull that up.
All right.
No
thanks.
problem.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I'd be happy to take a read.
Okay, all right, very good.
They came back with.
So.
I didn't think we could.